All right, so I finished public opinion, and now I need to go back and do a ton of the chapter summaries, basically the second half of the book. But before I do that, I just want to call out that as I've been thinking about these video essays or these sort of faceless documentary style videos for YouTube or whatever, public opinion and Walter Lippmann would be a great topic. And I'm only saying that and mentioning it right now because I'm gonna have to go and do a bunch of the recap in one video, and I'm not gonna be able to capture it as well as I would like to, but trust that in here is plenty of stuff and it is relevant. And I think it makes for a great topic because Lippmann is relatively understudied and not as well known. But I think his thoughts have aged well, and they translate very nicely to where we are at right now. So that being said, I will get into the chapter summaries, but before that, I want to try something a little bit different, because after I finished it, I was exploring, trying to look for more information about Lippmann and sort of his thinking, and came across, I was looking at his Wikipedia, which highlighted sort of this pretty direct battle between John Dewey and him, and that I thought was interesting. And exploring this, I felt like it provides a great chance for me to try to take what I've learned and provide a counter argument to what I'm about to read. So again, John Dewey, he wrote a book called The Public and Its Opinions, where he presents a rebuttal to Walter Lippmann's treatise on the role of journalism in democracy. Lippmann's model was a basic transmission model in which journalists took information given to them by experts and elites, repackaged that information in simple terms, and transmitted the information to the public, whose role was to react emotionally to the news. In his model, Lippmann supposed that the public was incapable of thought or action, and that all thought and action should be left to the experts and elites. Dewey refutes this model by assuming that politics is the work and duty of each individual in the course of his daily routine. The knowledge needed to be involved in politics in this model was to be generated by the interaction of citizens, elites, experts, through the mediation and facilitation of journalism. In this model, not just the government is accountable, but the citizens, experts, and other actors as well. This is crazy. Okay, so what's kind of interesting or weird about this example is that, first of all, the framing of the Lippmann argument is so, it's hard to, it's not even wrong. Like, that's how off it is, which is crazy because Wikipedia tends to do a pretty good job of monitoring this stuff. And it's just kind of wild. So what's frustrating here about this, for one, Lippmann is very careful, and so either whoever wrote this article didn't read public opinion because they would know better than this, or they didn't understand it, and I'm guessing Dewey is the same way. But the irony here is that essentially what Lippmann describes as a huge flaw or kind of error or even a fallacy in thinking is expressed in this. So so Lippmann didn't say that the model of journalism is this basic transmission model in which journalists took information given by it. It's not like Lippmann believes that this system is just the elites give the information, the experts and elites give this information, and journalists just repackage it in simpler terms and transmit that information to the public, like a true propaganda machine, like a propaganda state. To me, it almost seems, by their description of this, as though they essentially understood the gist of what Lippmann's claim was, and then read like maybe the first chapter where they're talking about the transmissions of military codes and that transmission process, right? But even that would be wrong, because the point of that Lippmann is making is that it's similar to Chomsky in that every time information needs to be passed on, like, so the event occurs, the newsworthy event occurs, right? And when the information of that event needs to be passed on, it goes through filters, and that's just a natural thing. Like, but notably, one of the aspects of that is that each individual experiences the event slightly different, and that's highlighted in the example that he talks about, where they had that psychology summit, and there was like a Senate hearing thing, and they intentionally had that clown show with the fight, and they had all of them kind of journal down the events as they recalled them, and it was right before. And the inaccuracy of their memory of that event that just took place was so varied that it led to some really interesting conclusions. And so, right, it makes sense. Like, if you peel back the layers, everyone is experiencing things slightly differently. Part of it has to do with differences, right? So the environment that they grew up in, right? Or what is considered novel to certain people is different than others, right? That's kind of the idea between the rookie and the veteran in kind of any scenarios. The veteran has seen it all, and they've been around for a long time. They're very familiar with it. And the rookie, eyes wide open, like everything's so new, they're seeing it through this different perspective. Right, so anyway, the point being that the model isn't just this like machine-like model as that they're describing it, and the idea that, like, they're claiming that he said that the role of the public was to react emotionally to the news is so reductive, it's crazy. More accurately is just like, and that's the thing, and kind of one of the fundamental pieces here, a fundamental thread, is that Lippmann is combating ideals, right? And it appears to me that John Dewey is this very idealistic person, and The problem with that is they're not rooted in the reality of the world, right? Whether they can't comprehend why that is, or they have unchecked their bias so egregiously that, you know, I guess that's the same thing. Like, they can't comprehend it. Right, because the idea, and this is what, this was a challenge for me, because, and I've talked about this in one of my previous videos, where he was really challenging some of the ideas that I had been exploring recently, on things like ideal forms of government. Like, the perfect system for a government isn't really possible, at least not now. And that's just because of the varied experience of so many people in a common space. And so until that experience in the common space is similar enough that we can be fairly certain that we understand all of the different perspectives, until that point, there won't be a system that accounts for that many variables. The number of variables, right? Think about, the United States as a whole, right? So we have people making decisions in DC, right? In one area. These people have very similar backgrounds, right? Very different from the common experience of the population, right? But not even just that. Like, think about how different the experience is for a farmer in rural Minnesota, southern Minnesota, or versus someone living in Malibu, an executive living in Malibu, versus the Disney Land or World employee in Florida, and the cowboy in Texas, and the barista in Seattle. Like, when I described all of those things, I intentionally picked, I didn't start out this way. The Minnesota one is not a great one for this in particular, but it turned into pretty stereotypical ideals with an area, right? So I had to generalize a stereotype for those people, but even with those generalizations, you understand how different each of those people are, both in who they are as a person, but also geographically. Imagine what, the experience of all of the experiences in a year for a person in Seattle versus in Florida. Very different. Different experiences with climate, different experiences with the people around them. The type of conversations that you're likely to have, the jobs, all of these different things, right? So you see how different and varied the experiences are across the country, right? And so all Lippmann is saying is that there are so many variables, all of those little details across every single person in every state for the entire country, across time as well, right? Like, to be discussing the thoughts of the founding fathers, right? That comes at a particular time, which is loaded with a ton of context around that time period, that influences the thoughts and actions at that time. So the point is, and again, history is a factor in being a well-informed citizen, right? So the argument that it is that the ideal model is for the responsibility to fall on each citizen to carry that weight is a ridiculous assumption, because in the perfect sense, it requires them to be almost omnipotent, to see every scenario, every single perspective, which is sort of my issue. Is like, that seems to be like the pursuit that I've been on, is like, I got to see every perspective to figure out which one is the best one. It's just not possible. And so on the kind of other end of this too, right? And so that's the issue with assuming that politics is the work and duty of each individual in the course of their daily routine. It's a ridiculous, absurd notion to believe that should be true. Which is something, don't get me wrong, prior to reading this, I would have been like, hell yeah, I totally agree with that. But the thing is, and one of the points that he makes, right, is there's been studies on the amount of time people give to reading the news or engaging with the news, becoming informed. And at least at the time of writing this, in the 1920s, I think, it was about 30 minutes a day. And notably, right, the other aspect too, I was talking about the ideals, right, and how this is an idealistic thing. We have a very idealistic image of what journalism is. We don't actually root it in the real world. And that's another thing that Lippmann does a good job of highlighting, is like, here's the reality of this situation. It's irresponsible for us to believe that this knowledge is just possible to happen for free. It's just not possible. Who is going, like, again, the varied experience, the amount of dedication required to unearthing and sharing the truth is more than to do it in the perfect sense is unattainable. To do it as best as we possibly can is a full-time job. And again, the reality of news is that our current structure for it has an economy. It's a business model. It relies on advertising, right? And although the ultimate responsibility of journalists is to their viewers, because without the viewers, they don't get the sponsors. At the same time, they do need to weigh the interests, their economic interests, and they have to sort of make a choice that shouldn't be involved in truth, in the preservation of truth, which is sometimes it would be better for them to withhold information from the public that they would benefit from to serve their economic interests. If a particularly large advertiser there's a newsworthy event with a particularly big spender in their advertisements, they're going to think twice about covering that. And even if they do, it's going to be painted in a particular light, right? So there's a filtering that's happening. Chomsky does an elegant job at explaining all of this. The point being, the realistic understanding, and I think that this is more apparent now, and so hindsight is 2020. I think maybe just time hasn't fared well for Dewey, and favors Lippmann in this case. But still, the Wikipedia page here is misleading on this. So, and then we get into the knowledge needed to be involved in politics in this model was to be generated by the interaction of citizens, elites, experts, through the mediation and facilitation of journalism. So, yeah, we already talked about that. And then Dewey also said that journalism should conform to this ideal by changing its emphasis from actions or happenings, choosing a winner of a given situation, to alternatives, choices, consequences, and conditions in order to foster conversation and improve the generation of knowledge. Journalism would not just produce a static product that told what had already happened, but the news would be in a constant state of evolution as the public added value by generating knowledge. In a sense, I do think what they're describing here became social media to a large degree, and we're seeing the shortcomings of this because, again, this is a very idealistic perspective, whereas Lippmann is grounded by some sense of reality. Having a journalistic structure like this seems really great, right? But we have some data points, reference points, to know that it's not all that it's cracked up to be, because misinformation can spread like wildfire in an environment like this, where in this conversational setting, this very social setting, understanding truth is not the root of it all, and it becomes such a confusing, entangled mess that it's hard to even know how to get back to that. Is it even possible? Does the truth even exist? So the other thing too is, like, Lippmann wasn't really anti-journalism. I think that's kind of a sort of subtle inference you can make by the arguments here, which is not the case. Instead, he just believed that there needed to be more of a formal and localized structure of this, committees for it. This is something that I've been itching to talk about, so I'm glad that I kind of came to this. So Lippmann advocated for the creation of these intelligence, he called them like intelligence committees, but again, so what do you call them? I don't know, they're intelligence committees. Which I found really interesting, and I really want to believe that it could work, but I don't. And here's why. So he even admits that, okay, there's two things that I need to address here. One, the context, the timing of his writing. This is post World War I, pre World War II, and the world looked very different. And we have some experiences since then that shape kind of my understanding of this. So what he doesn't have the luxury of knowing is how intelligence committees, or how some of these deep inner workings, these committee groups, or structures like this can be exploited, can be infiltrated and leveraged. So notably, it's interesting his word choice in like intelligence committees, which obviously in the 60s, the 50s, 60s, like the CIA formations of like the CIA, FBI, right? These intelligence organizations created in wartime, operating, obviously